would people prefer to die of hunger or COVID-19? It's a thin line, Brian.
Yeah, you see, looking at the trend, especially here in Kenya, where the projection of the death toll was quite high as compared to how it is right now. And the people, local Kenyans are saying people are not dying en masse, people are not dying as they. We could see the graphics in Italy, Spain, US, where people could be buried in trenches, mass, burial, mass cremations. They are not seeing those features. And others are even questioning about the validity or even the reliability of this source of the cases of this disease. Some are not even pessimistic about whether the disease is really real, because they're asking, have you seen these patients? Some are even asking. But again, we need to be given more information as a country, especially the people living in such informal settlements. They need to be really told this disease is real, this disease kills, and this disease is really, spreading, and therefore they need to take precaution measures. If we go by that trend in terms of disbelieving whether this disease is there, I think we are likely to see what the World Health Organization is now saying, the second spike or a second wave of this disease happening in larger numbers, because people are going to relax, people are just going to behave abnormally, and this disease, as Motaika would put it, it would treat them differently.
As I listen to you, Brian, I think one of the questions coming into my mind as just following up on the conversation we are having, so then, do you think even the measures we have right now as a country are enough to help us flatten the curve and even enable us to reopen the economy and also schools?
To me, I think, first of all, the issue of schools. The president, of course, through the Minister of the CS for Education, Bonamagoha, actually did form a task force of, I think, over 10 members committee to, study and come up with recommendations of modalities of how schools can be resumed. And to me, I think this was a good measure, a good step forward, because the part of the recommendations that we anticipate to see is that schools can, resume, not en masse or not wholesale, but just maybe from the previous suggestions that maybe the candidates can first resume, standard 8s and Form 4s, and maybe gradually now introducing the other cadre of streams, because that would have created a situation where they have studied, they have sort of, so to speak, quarantined the existing students and understood that they have now this disease, and now gradually increase the other portion or the other streams of students, maybe from 3s, maybe the next time the, gradual, resumption of education, to me, can be done. And again, also about the economy, of course, you see, the only thing that we have in terms of how we used to do before is only that we are sleeping a little bit earlier than chicken, where we go home at around 7 and find ourselves at home at around 6. Nothing much has changed, because you realize that people are still going to work in shifts as they used to go at night. So I think, to me, opening the economy, I think will be done, but the measures that will be put in place, like the spacing in matatus or in public transport, the spacing in hotels, the spacing even in maybe academic institutions, that maybe will affect the income that some of these private and public institutions were earning in terms of, in terms of profit. Because if you have an hotel which was actually accommodating around 200 people at a time, because I've seen such restaurants in Nairobi, and now you are actually having 50. Of course, that has a direct overbearing on the pockets of, the investor. And also the person, the customer, will also have a ripple effect on the same, because cost of some of these items, like food stuff, will also go up, because the investor has to recoup some of the money that he has invested in this business.
All right. Well, I know that the CS did mention something here that, leaves you wondering then what happens to public transport, because he says that public transport, being also the primary means of transportation, is said to be, a catalyst for the fueling of COVID-19. So what does that mean for the transport system in the country?
Yeah, this is also another area of concern. It's a worrying trend. that investors in the Matatu sector, especially the public sector, are not observing or not taking the keen interest that they had taken in terms of putting the right precautions in fighting the COVID-19 menace. Initially at least we were excited to see Matatu crews actually sanitizing, passengers when they are getting, but nowadays they have, loosened up a little bit, and you can see just people walking in Matatus, and even the cramming of people in those Matatus, to me, it's a worrying trend, because as Mutahika, we actually rightly put it, yes, Matatus are actually are becoming a catalyst for the spread of this disease, because when you go to areas such as Eastlands and Madares and those informal sectors in Kibera, they are not, worried about the numbers in a certain vehicle at a time. People are just being filled in Matatu, just like nothing is happening. And this is actually true that Matatus is part of the catalyst of this COVID-19 spread.
Okay. Well, let's move away from COVID-19 for a bit. I want us to look at matters politics, talk about Kindiki declining the new Senate appointment. Of course, an appointment he says he only learned through the media. And he feels, well, you know what, I'm not interested in the appointment, but he says thank you for the appointment. But I would rather focus on serving Kenyans. What do you make of his response to this news of the new appointment that was being served to him?
I think Kindiki, going by the happenings of last week, I think to me, I think he's still an agitated man. He's still bitter about his poster from the Speaker of the Senate. And to me, being given a position as a member of a House Business Committee, whichever committee is that, I think to me, maybe he felt it was a sort of demotion and felt like, oh, I'm going to decline on this one. It's not going to add much value to me. Although, well, House Business Committee membership is still something that members of Senate and members of Parliament will still grapple or to have a chance to participate in that because of the allowances and so on and so on. But to him, maybe he's making a statement that he has come of age. He's not being perturbed by this small position that is being given, owing to the fact that he had already been stripped of a bigger position, being a speaker, a deputy speaker of the Senate. So to me, I mean, it's just a natural reaction of a human being who is not happy with what has actually happened. This kind of emotion to him, I think he's just reacting to an action that to him feels was not really a good one.
Well, let's just move back to COVID-19. I feel like you've said everything about that particular story, but I know it's developing and we'll see what happens in the future. Looking at the proposal to push examinations to 2021, teachers and children, according to the NAT Secretary General Wilson Sossion, are more important, and it's better to safeguard their lives than consider reopening schools because of maybe examinations. What do you make of the NAT Secretary General's sentiments about the reopening of schools?
I think you need to be more advised about this, because he doesn't see he doesn't foresee the implication about the action that he is actually agitating for. I tell you for free that if you push these examinations to 2021, to me, I'm not supporting this, because of course there will be the accumulative factor, because the pupils or students who are actually supposed to also be in the same exam in 2021 doing the same with those who are supposed to do it in 2020, I think there will be a mess. There will be a situation where perhaps things will not be, right, because you find that there'll be a sort of confusion in terms of even the ability by some of the higher institutions like universities to take up some of the students who are coming from a joint year of examination. Like, for example, Standard 7 and Standard 8, both of them transiting to university. I think to me, something somewhere will not work properly. Something somewhere will still have a ripple effect, and it will have some implications also, even on resources, because of the capacity of the institutions to take the numbers that we have. Double intake is not easy. Again, when you look at that call for pushing the exams to 2021, to me, again, it is not a well thought out, because when you look at the amount of time these students have spent in school compared to the remaining time, I think they can only, or the ministry can only devise a way of letting these students do their exams amid the situation as it is. Because to me, I think with the good measures in terms of, first of all, quarantining these students for some period of 10 days and then letting them now start interacting and ensuring that we have no external, incomings of interactions. I think to me, that can be a measure that can work to ensure the safety and, good progress of these students in terms of health and in terms of academic preparation. Something different to me, I think, Leah, would be actually detrimental to future planning of the education sector and also the resources attached to the whole issue of student intake and student uptake by other institutions.
Let's talk about the age of some of the teachers. We had the NACT Secretary General talking about most teachers being over 50 years. Of course, this is an age bracket that is considered to be very vulnerable when it comes to contracting COVID-19 and its implications. Should this be a concern right now? Because, what does it mean? Do we get out some of the teachers or all the teachers who are 50 years and above, or do we introduce measures that can protect them? What will be the ideal situation if then we are to reopen schools and still have teachers over 50 years?
Yeah, sure. It's a worrying trend, but 50, according to World Health Organization and the global demographics, a 50-year-old is a young person. By the way, young person is up to 65. If you look keenly on what World Health Organization defines a young person, it's only that in Kenya we see it differently, that a 50-year-old person is an old person. If you go to those countries where COVID-19 affected the aged ones, you'll find that it's not 50s, it's not 60s. The people who are highly affected or susceptible or highly vulnerable to this disease were 80s and above. To them, I think that's where we can talk about people being, a little bit elderly or aged. But 50-year-old, to me, Leah, if you ask me, that's a very young person whose immunity system is still very strong, and this person can come out of the blues and can come out of the, the whole, episode of COVID and come out of it successfully. So 50-year-old is not a worrying issue to me.
Okay. Well, let's just move on to another story here on a lighter note. Let me not say a lighter note. It's still a heavy story because we have seen people going to social media, resharing this particular video and using the hashtag Free Idris Sultan. This story, Brian, talking about the Tanzanian comedian by the name Idris Sultan, who now is out on bail after a court appearance. Idris Sultan's story here, he is said to have been detained by police after a video of him laughing at an old photo of the president was widely shared. I'd like to hear what you think about this story.
Yeah, I think this is a story which is interesting because the guy was just released the other day, I think yesterday, out of from a bail arrangement. And the mistake he did was failing to register SIM card. I think to me, Tanzania it's an interesting scenario in Tanzania because maybe Idris is actually suffering from what, he's perceived to have done before, because initially, you remember, he was also put behind the bars for actually having a short head poster with the president, and that did not go down well with the authorities, and therefore he was incarcerated for some period. And today, as early as yesterday or late as yesterday, the guy was again released from a prison setup because of failing to register a SIM card. Of course, I will tell you that that should not have been the case, because SIM card registration, for example, if you go by the Kenyan trend, in terms of the Information and Communication Act 1998, which was revised in 2015, I'll tell you that under Section 5 of that Act clearly gives us a guideline on how to register a SIM card as citizens, and we have an obligation as citizens. Also, if you go to Tanzania, also a citizen has an obligation, not the citizen alone or not the client alone as a person, but also the telecommunication agent or the communication institutions such as Safaricom or Airtel also have an obligation to ensure that the SIM cards that are in the market are also registered. So getting Idris and detaining him, I think to me, it's just a scapegoat, because that's not where the problem is. The problem is with the telecommunication institution that granted that line, that made that line active, even if it's not registered to the name of the user. So to me, I think this is it's a combination of confusion and maybe a witch hunt of sorts, or maybe the guy is suffering for sins that he committed some past time.
And further to what you're saying, we've seen that his detention is considered to be serving as a latest reminder, Brian, of digital regulations of laws that rights activists basically so far have described as being harsh. And I don't know what you would make of this, the sentiments from some of the rights activists. They consider this move as being very harsh, the detention. But again, looking at it from your own perspective, understand that Sultan is detained for laughing at an old photo of the president. What would you say about this?
Okay, there's a combination of issues here. First of all, maybe, as I said, he's suffering, for being, expressing himself. According to our Constitution, of course, Bill of Rights, you find that people have those fundamental rights to express themselves and to say whatever they want to say. And this is actually part of the constitutional provision that we are given as a fundamental right. And it's also enclaved within the other global instruments. But in Tanzania, I think with the Magufuli administration and maybe having, had a previous altercation with one Idrisi, and also maybe have a frosty relationship between the two of them, I think maybe it's a lesson that he would want to be seen to be, serving to other people, so that maybe they can actually treat the person or the character of the president with more dignity and more respect. I think to them, democracy is still a nascent issue compared to here in Kenya, where we seem to have actually to be exercising all these freedoms, all this enlarged space, and we seem to be enjoying it every day, because here in Kenya, remember Millie Odhiambo insulting the president, leave alone laughing at him, and she went scot-free. Look at what the president has been going. Look at what the presidency has been going. Look at the editorials, cartoons and so on and so on. And people are just led to do that because the Constitution protects the right for them to do the same. In Tanzania, sorry to say, it's a bit sorry state, still nascent in terms of people's ability to express themselves. And if going by the trend of how Magufuli has been actually flexing his muscles, I think to me, the gains that they have been having as a people, I think they are somehow being, eroded.
Brian, let's just bring it home a little bit, because as much as you're talking about expression, talk about cyberbullying, defaming people on social media. But let's just put it under cyberbullying. Would you say perhaps there's an issue of cyberbullying, especially at this moment where technology is so accessible to many people?
Yeah, of course, the issue of cyberbullying is such a huge issue here in Kenya and even globally. It's only that the other day, I don't know whether you're a good student of history, the other day we had issues to do with the security bill, which again was returned because it had some detrimental so-called a bit restrictive measures when it comes to exercising or enjoying the cyberspace freedoms and so on and so on. But again, looking at the cyberbullying issue in Kenya, we have an act of parliament in terms of Information and Communication Act 2015, which also has, some provisions on how to protect people and the measures that need to be taken for people to be able to behave in a certain manner to ensure that they do not abuse that cyberspace. And again, people have been suffering, of course, from cyberbullying across the country. It's only that the ability for law enforcers to ensure that they nip this problem from the bud seems to be a little bit elusive, because initially we have seen people like bloggers also going to the courts, to answer some few questions about their acts or their omissions and so on and so on. But the ability by the government to, do this en masse and ensure that the cyberspace is clean and the people are not suffering from, it's becoming a huge headache for the government. And I think there is a need for maybe an enforcement team to ensure that they are able to crack this issue of cyberbullying at the nib Because when you look at how people are suffering online in terms of cyberbullying, it's a lot, especially women who go through a lot of, mistreatment, a lot of even sexual harassment, issues of terrorism also happening on cyberspace. These are issues that need to be reinforced. And I wish I can challenge communication authority, and I wish I can challenge the presidency to form a task force to ensure that our cyberspace is free from these cyberbullies.
Okay. Brian Mutie, thank you so much for making time. We have come to a close of this segment. My director tells me you have run out of time. But thank you so much, Brian, for making time. It's always a pleasure, and we hope to see you next week, same time.
Sure. Thank you so much, Leah. Enjoy yourself. And maybe, just to remind you, you keep safe, keep social distance, sanitize, make sure that you're wearing your mask properly, and at the end of the day, you are going to be free from this COVID-19. Stay safe.
Thank you so much, Brian. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Well, that has been Brian Mutie, who is a governance and policy analyst, just talking to us about different issues we were highlighting throughout this discussion, helping you and I understand further in the eyes of Brian and the knowledge that he has about all the issues that we have been discussing. And right now, I want us to take a short break. And when we return, we talk about all matters depression. Depression affects everyone. I mean, it does not discriminate against age. Anyone is a candidate for getting depression, but this is dependent on your circumstance and the kind of situations that you may be dealing with. But I want us to understand more about depression, how to overcome depression, the symptoms of depression, and what to look out for, in order to realize that someone is actually struggling with depression. So don't go too far. The Morning Cafe will be back shortly with this discussion. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you are watching the Morning Cafe with me, Lengari. I wanted to look at the roads right now. We may not be able to look at the roads, but we'll be sure to try and look at them a little later. And I just want to mention that the discussion going on right now is basically about depression. And I do know that depression is a very major issue for us right here in the country, and it's not really something that we want to ignore because it's on the rise according to what the experts are saying. The World Health Organization has talked about this a lot. And with me in studio I have Jane Gasheru, who is a counseling psychologist, to help us understand all matters depression, how to overcome depression and the signs of depression, which are really not easy to tell. Jane Gasheru, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for making time. I would have shaken your hand, but you know, social distancing.
Understood.
You know, Jane, I've done very many stories on depression over the years, and depression seems to be an issue that is recurrent. Previously, we were talking about women being predisposed to depression more than the men. Now we're even hearing cases of men becoming, you know, the people who we can say depression is being found amongst the population of men in the country, especially Kenyan men. But over and above that, I just want us to understand, what is depression?
Well, layered depression is a state of what we call basically a depressed mood, meaning that most of the time, more often than not, the individual sort of experiences a lot of sadness. It comes with mood swings to an extent that even it hampers an individual's energy, even the ability to move around. You can basically see it even reflected in terms of their appearance. The person will slow down, become more fatigued than usual. You can even tell maybe by even how they will oversleep as a result. So when we talk about someone being depressed, it means that this is a mental illness that actually depresses your mental functions as well as your physical functions. So you can see it because of the mood, you know, being, when we say a depressed mood, then it means that it is low. Yes.
So I hear you talking about depression, but what you're talking to me about now sounds like the signs of depression. Let's go further into that. Most of the articles, you know, even looking at what the World Health Organization talks about in relation to depression, is not something that you can actually look at someone most times and tell, oh, the person is depressed. Because even like some of the articles I've read, someone can be laughing, jumping up and down, you know, energetic, but they're depressed. So when we talk about signs of depression, what do we look out for?
Well, some of the most common signs are some form of irritability. There are some people who become highly irritable when they are depressed. So it may not be all the time, but if you watch someone keenly, then you can always tell when there is a change in personality. They get irritable over very small things. Then you will notice a sudden weight gain or weight loss that is unexplainable. Like maybe someone was let's say 60 kgs last week, and this week they weigh 50. You see, that's a bit, you know, it's a bit extreme. You don't lose such weight, that much weight within a very short period of time, especially not when you cannot explain it. If you're exercising, you're on diet, okay, but when you're not, then that tells you there's something wrong. Some people also tend to oversleep, or some people have insomnia. So it can be both ways. So you will notice maybe this person was previously just sleeping normal hours, and then all of a sudden they can sleep through the entire day. Or another person will not have any sleep at all. Maybe they'll keep on waking up at night. There is also the sadness that I was talking about. So sadness to an extent that the person may even cry. The difference why you're saying that some people could be even laughing, you know, we have different personality types. There are people who are basically bubbly by nature, and the people who are more bubbly than others tend to sort of have a way of masking their pain. And so because of this, you may not notice the sadness. But if you're keen to look at the other symptoms, then you will see. Another symptom, and of course this now you can only tell by the individual talking about it, is the person starts talking about death and even thinking about death. You know, they will make subtle comments like, hey, by the way, I wouldn't mind going right now. You know, there's nothing left for me in this world. So that also communicates some sort of hopelessness. and a feeling of worthlessness in the individual. And eventually, depending on who we are talking about, it can lead to suicidal ideation, whereby the person now begins to even fantasize about committing suicide. So all these are now some of the most prominent symptoms of depression.
And what is usually the cause of depression?
We have a lot of factors, but the major factor, the chief factor, is stress. Now, the difference is that some of us are more vulnerable to stress than others. So we have some individuals who, maybe because of their personality types, they are more predisposed to get depression even under the same circumstances as another person. So most of the time when people are exposed to very stressful situations, I'll give examples of, for example, dysfunctional marriages, children in dysfunctional families. We have people facing extreme conditions, maybe like working conditions, maybe business failure. All these are things that can, in the long run, lead to depression, depending on the individual's ability to cope with the situation.
Now, when we talk about men, men have a way of hiding their emotions. And sometimes you might mistake the silence of a man for someone who's just maybe reflecting. How do you tell when a man is depressed?
So men now, remember the irritability that I was talking to you about. Most men tend to, for most of their feelings, they tend to substitute most of their emotions with anger. And so irritability is highly observable in children and the male gender when they are depressed. But even the other symptoms apply, like maybe a loss of energy and a loss of interest in activities that were previously interesting to them. So say, for example, you have a man who previously used to enjoy a certain TV shows, like maybe a documentary, and then all of a sudden this person has totally lost interest in whatever it is that they were interested in. Another thing is also a loss of interest in sex as well, because sex is meant for pleasure. So anything pleasurable, you tend to see the individual's interest now going down on what they previously enjoyed. That is also a pointer that when I can't enjoy anything in my life that I previously found interesting, it's like I'm losing now I have lost the will to live. Yes.
Let's talk about women. Because women also go through a lot of pressure from motherhood, juggling jobs, like you mentioned. Sometimes stress is a major factor when it comes to people boiling down to getting depressed. So for women, how can someone tell when a woman is actually depressed?
Women now tend to cry most of the times because, of course, our emotional nature. So women, their feelings of sadness tend to result to crying. And because we are able to express our emotions more than the male gender, I think that is why now the crying helps. When someone starts crying for no reason all the time, they burst into tears for what you would probably call nothing to cry over, then that should be, it should be a sign of an alarm. Also, the other symptoms that you were talking about, there are some people who even wake up maybe on a particular day and you find that they have no will to do anything. Now, if, for example, you have, in this case, a woman who has children, and especially very young children, but then they have even lost their interest in nurturing those children, then that tells you something. It's the same case like if you have someone suffering from postpartum depression, mostly you notice that they're not even interested in their child's needs, whereas a mother is usually very nurturing and responsive. So this withdrawal, by the way, is also another major sign. Withdrawing and isolation from the other world. As women, we have a lot of responsibilities, especially around the home. You become the nurturer. You have to take care of the kids, your husband. And so when you find a woman actually withdrawing from what she normally, all these people who are depending on her, then that tells you there actually could be something that is wrong.
I know that other than even the adults who are affected, like you've mentioned, there's also young people, the youth. And depression is said to be very, very common amongst the youth, and it's actually on the rise. What are some of the ways to point out? For parents, a parent wants to know if their child is okay. So how do you point out, you know, what are some of the things to look out for, especially amongst the youth, as far as depression or suicidal tendencies are concerned?
So mostly withdrawal. If the person has become all of a sudden withdrawn, then that should be cause for worry. Withdrawal and isolating themselves. Again, the high irritability that we were talking about. Because of this change in mood that takes place when someone is depressed, most teenagers tend to get highly irritable. So they will respond in a certain way. They'll probably blow up under circumstances that they previously did not. There is also a certain preoccupation with maybe social media and TV that is also abnormal. Like if you are constantly, this child or teenager is constantly watching movies the entire night, they do that a whole day, that is cause for worry, because not only is it a sign, but that over-absorption and addiction to TV and social media has also been found to be, again, a contributing factor to depression. And the worrying fact about it is that the people who are depressed tend to still try and quench that hopelessness and feeling of helplessness using the very same means again, which is now the addiction to TV and social media that we are talking about. Yes, and then with suicidal ideation, mostly some teenagers will communicate, although they may say it in a manner that like it's out of spite. But it's important as a parent to pay attention to that. When someone starts talking about committing suicide, then take it seriously, because this person could actually be serious. So let her go and get checked by a mental health professional just to establish the seriousness of the issue. If it is not communicated, suicidal ideation will usually take the form of, again, the withdrawal that I was talking about, but usually even some attempts at self-harm. I have had teenagers who tell me that they have even they have been slashing their wrists and their parents have not noticed. So really paying attention to what your child is doing behind the closed doors is also very important.
Let's talk a little bit more about the young people. What are some of the causes, other than social media and the pressure of peer pressure and whatnot, when it comes to issues at home? What are we looking at? Some of the things you've heard from some of the teenagers that you're working with, or even the youth?
With the youth, let me talk about the teenagers and then maybe the older youth above the age of 18. For most teenagers, it's usually that navigating, it's an identity, there's an identity crisis around that age. So navigating that change in their lives can be difficult, especially without the support of parents. So most teenagers tend to find their way around these situations, and because of that, it can lead to frustration. And then, of course, having the suicidal ideation. Then we have the teenagers who live within dysfunctional families. So that again can be a source of trouble, where we have maybe there is violence in the family. The parents are fighting, there is physical violence. There could be emotional abuse, whereby this emotional abuse is either meted out on them or they observe it being meted out on a parent. Again, that can be a cause of worry for them, and eventually also leading to suicidal ideation. But I think the one that I have found that is most common with the youth in this age group is the fact that they are saying that their parents are not available for them, like their parents are too busy for them. So they would like to get more attention from their parents, but because, remember, this is someone who's transitioning from childhood to adulthood. Their communication skills do not allow them to be able to speak up, or rather to talk about this clearly with the parents. And so most of them end up having their needs unmet by the parents. So this feeling, this gap that is left by parents, most of them will try to fill it with toxic relationships, drinking, drugs, and so on and so forth.
We have a caller, Jane, and this is Quinta from Nairobi. We want to hear what Quinta has to say. Hello, Quinta? Unfortunately, we seem to have lost the caller. But the question now would be, Jane, can someone recover from depression?
Yes, you can. Just like any other, of course, we have some mental illnesses that are more serious than others. With depression, you can recover. Number one of the things that are very important is, of course, to seek help when you realize that there's a person suffering from depression, or you yourself are suffering from depression. Most of the time, even as the person is probably getting help, either through medication and counseling, it's important also for the person to exercise, which is usually a huge challenge for people who are depressed. They don't like moving around, and it's because most of the time depression leads to sort of like a slowing down of your body. So most of them will report feeling fatigued and tired most of the time. But it's important to encourage them to move around a bit. And not just to move around, but also to try out different things that they can pass their time with. Maybe gardening, if you have a small area where this person can plant something, it's usually very therapeutic to see something grow. Maybe also having them engage in other activities that they can enjoy little by little as they try and get, their groove back, so to speak, or try and get back to their normal selves. But yes, medication helps. There's therapy in the form of counseling, and then there's, of course, engaging, make sure the person gets to do something they love, and then also a lot of exercise also is helpful.
Let's finally wind up with the youth. You mentioned that some of them come from very dysfunctional families. And of course, I mean, if that's where they come from, then there's a possibility they may not be able to run away. For some, perhaps, they decide to run away. I've hosted different people who have gone into drug abuse. Most of them talk about troubled homes. Most of them also talk about going into depression, and so resorting to drug abuse and whatnot. To avoid all these things, what do you think we need to do as a nation and society to make sure we help address the issues back at home for those young people who have no choice but staying where there is dysfunction?
Number one, I think there's a huge gap in as far as parenting is concerned. And majorly because maybe our nation is just getting used to this new thing of, like having, should I call it, being in counseling, we call it psychoeducation, whereby we train people on certain skills. And we are not saying it's because people don't know how to parent. No, it's just because naturally we tend to take over from where our parents left off. Like, you parent the same way you are parented. And most of the time, that parenting is not viable in the current times that we are living in. So one, I think it's important for parents to go for parenting workshops or seminars whenever someone hears there is one around them, that please do not ignore. For the sake of your children, there's a lot that you will learn there about yourself, because mostly you find that parents tend to met out on their children the bitterness and the anger that they carry within themselves. So when you are you're not self-aware, then that means you're injuring your child without knowing. So those parenting classes are helpful in the sense that not only do you get to understand yourself, you get to understand your children according to their different personality types, and so you are able to treat them differently. You can tell their abilities, their skills, their talents. You can tell probably their strengths and limitations, and so you are able to support them even better. Because also another thing that has happened in the current world is because we have both parents working, then people have a very short time that they spend with their children every day. In fact, if you talk to most of the youth who are in boarding schools, they will tell you, my mother doesn't know me, or my father doesn't know who I am. So that tells you these people are strangers living in the same home.
So there's an issue of parenting, and there's actually classes that parents can pursue. Thank you so much, Jane Gasheri, for making time. I would love to have you here for one whole hour. We talk about depression, and I hope that in the future we'll have you again to talk more about depression and suicide, because I think it's a very important conversation that we need to continue having as a country. Thank you for making time.
Thank you for having me as well.
All right. Well, that has been Jane Gasheri, who is a counseling psychologist, talking to us about depression. I'm told that the brand, as we call him, Paul Kirobi, is in studio. He's all geared up and prepared to bring you the news of the day, tell you a little bit more about what's happening locally and internationally. My director, if you can tell me, I don't know if Paul Kirobi is able to talk to me from where he is. I'm being told he can only smile for today. So Paul Kirop, you can give me a smile or maybe thumbs up or something like that, or wave at me. Well, this has been the Morning Cafe. It's always a pleasure to have you join us. And tomorrow we have another discussion. Of course, this is all about entertainment. It's that particular day that you don't want to miss, because we'll have some bit of music and entertainment. So don't go too far from TV47. Keep it locked here. This is where we bring you all the content that